October of 2013. If you're interested in anything paleo, this conference has everything. I mean, it's a 3-day conference, and it was a world-renowned paleo scientists, archaeologists. Everybody's included with anything like that. It's going to be at this conference. So I have a couple of handouts here at the desk. And if you're interested in it at all, come see me and I'll give you one of these and it tells you a little bit about it. And I can also send you the program, tentative program that they have set up for this conference. So without further ado, I would like to take a few brief moments to introduce Danielle Riebe, Attila Gyucha, and Billy Ridge as our guest speakers this evening. They're going to be speaking on a project they've been working on since at least 2021, and it's in Hungary, where Attila is a native of Hungary. And these three are really good buddies. They're married. And I just want to let you know that it's an excellent program. Okay, put that out there. All right. So anyway, without further ado, I would like to introduce Attila, Danny, and Billy. Thank you.
You're coming? That's weird. that's still weird. All right, hi everyone. So what I'm going to talk about is our past season, summer season in Hungary. We have this project since 2021. The name is Vésztő-Mágor Conservation and Exhibition Project. The goal of the project is basically the preservation of a very important archaeological trench and also the rejuvenation of the exhibition in that trench. Okay, it's in one sentence. All right, where are we first? If I can operate this. Manny, what happened to this? No? Oh, yeah. No, it's going to work probably. All right, so we are in Hungary. It's according to the locals, it's Central Europe. According to other people, it's Eastern Europe. Okay, just to specify. And within that, the site itself that we are working on is in Békéskani. The red dot is a little bit too big for the site, but at least visible on the map, right? So this is a landscape which is extremely flat. We are on the Great Hungarian Plain. Just try and imagine this table. It's pretty much like this. So this is basically how it looks. Yeah. This is basically how it looks, right? Super flat. But also in the picture, you can see the most important raw material that the Great Hungarian Plain has, and also life has, happiness. And this is our happy, fluffy cloths that would give you that kind of happiness living there, staying there, working there. So we are in Hungary, and the site itself again, let's just focus on the site itself. This is how it looks, right? Even if it's not clearly probably visible in the picture, but we have two mounds there, right? So mound 1, mound 2, they used to be just one big mound on this really flat terrain of the Great Hungarian Plain. So I'll talk about this mound later in detail, but this mound has been subject to excavations since the 1960s. These are the several trenches that have been excavated here, including these white ones, which were the first excavations. And those excavations aimed to dig basically this big monastery right here. And, this place was like, okay, so we have this mound, we had these excavations, then we exposed the remains of this medieval monastery. So why don't we create actually the reconstruction of the monastery? And by the way, we also have this wine cellar here that was built in the 19th century. That's like a perfect place for exhibitions. So, wow. So now we have actually a pretty nice site to display for visitors, right? All right. So what happened is like, well, based on that, in 1982, a national park was established here. Of course, the central feature, which is the mound itself and the monastery ruins. This is the central feature, but to the central feature, other features were added. You can see on this map. I'm not going to get in details, but eventually it became a major tourist magnet. Major tourist magnet to some extent, because we are talking about Eastern Hungary. It's not like the center of the world. I got to tell you that. So why is it important, that mound? Because of this. That's a tell. That mound that I was talking about, a tell site. What is a tell site? A tell site is a settlement mound. Basically, what happens that people would stick in the landscape at one spot. They would build their houses, but when they, for some reason, would be destroyed, they would put the next house on top of it, and the next generation on top of it, and on top of it, and eventually you would end up with a mound in the landscape. On the Great Hungarian Plain, you would have like a great monument. They are like almost like mountains. They look like that, right? So this is how it happens. And when we talk about tell settlements, these tell sites, we are talking these tell sites. They are always the result of more or less continuous development for multiple generations. Many times we are talking about hundreds of years, thousands of years. People stay there. They spatially restrict their occupation, and that's why you would end up with a mound instead of like a large horizontal settlement. All right, so what is the background in 2 sentences? So basically what happens, and that's the core, the root, starting around like 7000 BC, the first agriculturalists would start migrating from Anatolia to Europe, right? And eventually, after several thousand years, they will also end up in England, in the British Isles. Why is it important for us? Because with agriculturalism, with being a farmer, you are stuck in the landscape. You cannot like hang around anymore. It's like you cannot go hunting and fishing and just hanging out with your friends for 2 months in the spring. No. You gotta stay home. You gotta take care of your own lands. You gotta become sedentary, right? So what happens in the landscape, and we are talking about southeastern Europe, right? We're right here. Hungary is right here. What happens that some settlements would be still more or less mobile. After a couple of generations, they would move, then would establish a new village. But these guys living on the settlements, living on tells, they are long-standing settlements. They wouldn't move. They would stick in the landscape, and eventually, this is how we would end up with those beautiful mounds. And these mounds were also centers of politics, centers of economy, centers of ceremony. All right, so this is basically the little black things would indicate tell sites in southeastern Europe, right? This is Italy right here. This is Anatolia. This is Greece. And you can see that we have these tell sites throughout southeastern Europe, all the way up to the Great Hungarian Plain. That's the northmost expansion of tell sites. Well, if you excavate them, this is how they look. And of course, they had been subject to excavation since the 19th century, because we are talking about usually flat landscapes, and we have these mounds. Those mounds must be excavated, right? It's like in the States, right? When we see burial mounds, we see monuments, I just butter our eyes and let's just excavate them. This is exactly what happened starting in the 19th century. And how did they look? Basically, what you would see relatively dense occupation with many buildings. They are usually fortified. And again, they became the center of micro-regional political units and social units. So they were super important throughout the ages. And if you excavate them, what you would see is that. So basically, you have layers on top of layers representing different periods. Of course, the bottommost layer is the earliest occupation, and the topmost is the latest occupation at these tell sites. So this is how you need to more or less imagine what these tell sites are. Okay, let's just get back to our site, all right? So this is our site, and within the site, this entrance is super interesting and most important for us. So basically, in 1986, the director of the park, again, 1982, that's the establishment, 1986, they're like, okay, let's just, add another attraction that would just bring in more visitors, not just the reconstruction of the monastery, not just the wine cellar with the exhibition, let's just add something else. And they excavated a trench right here. That's basically the entrance. Looks like pretty concrete. Yep, that kind of like commie style in 1980s. Yep, it really fits my life. Absolutely. So that's the trench itself. So you enter, and this is what you see. This is about 15 feet wide, 60 feet long a trench, and the deepest point is about like 12 feet. So what they did, they were excavating this trench, and they stopped at some features. They left them exposed, like, for example, this grave dating to the Copper Age. This is a Copper Age house. There are some other graves here. They left them exposed for display, right? So what happened here is it was a 3-week excavation. Normally, it would take 20 years, okay? No more comment on this in terms of like professional standards. But, for us, the most important thing that we've been working in the region since 1998. I've been there for a little bit longer. But what happened that we entered the trench regularly, carrying out projects, and we saw that something bad is happening. So the trench itself started deteriorated to an extent that eventually the entire trench became dangerous, became also endangered. So people could not come and visit it anymore if the process would not be halted. So this is how it looked. You would see like deteriorating conditions, crumbling walls, falling big chunks of soils, basal erosion, which is what? Failing renders. They are like specific terms that we didn't know before we started this project. This is a conservation thing. So basically, the whole thing was falling apart, especially the northern part, which is the farthest part of the trench. So we were like, okay, so we've been working in this region for a while. How could we help? How could we help the local community, the park itself, to preserve this trench for future generations? It's a really important part of the local economy and also local identity. And who else could help if not us? So basically in 2021, we wrote up the first proposal in order to get funded. But when I was writing up the proposal, I'm like, okay, this is the history of the trench. This is what's happening. This is what archaeologically we should do. But when it comes to conservation, I was like, I have no idea how to preserve this site. I'm like, all right, so we need to involve other people. So what happened is I was lucky enough to know some people who excavated at Csatlahőjük, which is an Anatolian very famous site, also Tel site, and conservators had been working there for decades. And I reached out to conservators, and they were like, immediately, we are interested. So we invited them to Hungary, and we started working together basically immediately. It's not just always, work. We also could hang out nicely. We could have a Hungarian hooch there. We could have a really good time together. So we established a really good relationship professionally and also personally, because this is how long-term projects work. You gotta be able to get along both professionally and personally. So in this region where we are at, it's the so-called Körös region. We have multiple projects. The oldest one is Bill Parkinson, a guy from Chicago, and myself, established in 1996. And all these other projects are kind of like, what, daughters, sons, or grandsons sometimes by now. But my point from the view of the project, is that we basically came together. We established the Körös Consortium specifically in order to preserve this site and also rejuvenate the exhibition. So when it comes to actors, of course, we are talking about the archaeologists. That's, us. Then we have the conservators. Again, it needs to be preserved, and we are not conservators, just not. That's a different profession. Then we have the park managers. Of course, we need to work closely with the park. They have their own goals, own aims, own requirements, own desires, right? And also, in order to preserve the trench. A shelter was built on top of it, right? But that also needs to be rebuilt, reconstructed. So we need to work with the engineers. And also the problem is that we recognize really quickly that why we see this deterioration in the trench is because the flexible, or rather fluctuating temperature and fluctuating moisture, we gotta fix that, and we have no idea how to do that. Conservators don't know, we don't know, we need engineers. So they are a very important part of this project. And of course, the local government of Vésztő, the town itself nearby, who's been contributing to this project politically and also financially. So it's a pretty complex, pretty difficult project, but we've been doing pretty well since 2022. We've been having field seasons, and it will continue in the future for 2 or 3 more years.
Let's get ready to crumble! All right, so I'm going to talk to you guys about the archaeology of this project, right? So it's a conservation project, that's the goal. But we have to do a little archaeology to prepare the trenches to be conserved, right? That's kind of what I've been in charge of the last few years, is the archaeology, right? And it's not your typical archaeology project, right? Because one, in normal archaeology, you're digging something that hasn't been dug before, and you're digging down. We're all used to, right? We got our northings and soundings and stuff like that. But here we have a lot of kind of hiccups. One, often we're digging this way, right? And then sometimes this way, sometimes this way, sometimes this way, oddly enough, right? It's at multiple levels. Sometimes you have to get some scaffolding, and we're inside, right? So it's dark. So we have to run electricity, we have to bring lights in. Get a lot of feedback. It's just kind of a hassle, right? We're often on many different levels, and there's exhibits there we're trying not to disturb, right? We're trying to not ruin the archaeology that we're trying to preserve. So there's a lot of challenges, right? Sometimes in archaeology, you usually dig until there's no more digging, right? Or till you've answered the question. But that's not the goal of this project, right? It's to dig just enough to save it, right? So sometimes you're digging very small. So you can see here, sometimes it's like 20 centimeters very, and you're saying stop, 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 regardless of how cool of what the things are finding, right? And sometimes you find full intact vessels from the Bronze Age, and you carefully excavate them out. And then you realize, how the heck are we getting this out of here, right? And you go up there, and people have to crawl up and shimmy it out, right? So there's a lot of kind of hurdles that we have to jump over just to do the excavating, right? Because at the end, the goal is not just the science, right? We'll get a little science in there too, but the goal is to conserve, right? To make this, I keep walking in front of it, right? Into a display, which Danny will talk about in a second here. All right, first, I'm going to kind of talk about the archaeology of it all, right? And to tell you the truth, right? I'm not a fan of tellus, right? My personal research deals with non-tellus settlements, right? Because they're a pain in the butt, right? As Attila was saying, right? They're huge, they take forever, you have to deal with all of these layers, but they're very important spots in the landscape. So all the coolest stuff happens to be there, right? They're historically important places through different periods, right? We can see a lot of change over time, right? So you can see when they're inhabited early in the Neolithic, into the Copper Age, into the Bronze Age. So you can track certain changes over that time. And they give you unique preservation conditions, right? So stuff that doesn't normally preserve in other settlements, we end up finding here, right? So I'm going to run you through some of those, right? And these photos are actually from the 70s from Kellen Hegedus's excavations there. Kind of showing how much of a pain in the butt these things are to dig, right? So we're almost thankful that we don't have to dig the whole thing, right? It's a lot of work. All right, so one of the cool things that was preserved that we found 2022, 2023, right? Somewhere around there, right? Is a Bronze Age woven mat, right? So one of the first things up in the Bronze Age layers, you can see Polly over there pointing to it. This is what it looks like when it came out of the soil, right? Not much to look at. But we're actually able to analyze it, bring in some specialists, and we're actually been able to publish this. One of our first publications from this project is on this mat. This is the first one, right, though? Oh, this is the second one.
I mean, second publication that came out about the work.
Yeah, right? And we actually can see how they've woven it through, right? So this was ended up being interpreted as a mat that would have been up above, right? Probably catching debris on a ceiling level, right? So not something on the ground, but something on the ceiling because, earthen architecture, a lot of debris falling down. You don't want that, so this would have caught it, right? So it's a pretty cool thing you don't find, very unique find in itself, right? This last year, we topped that by finding Neolithic wood, right? So this is wood preserved for over 6,000 years, and we're finding it, right? And I know it's not much to look at. You can kind of see it here, right? We found some little beams. They're over here in the trench. A large piece here that's being held right there. It's actually a piece of a coffin associated with this burial right here, right? So we came down, we were digging next to the burial, came across some wood, and realized, wow, this is the coffin, right? That's been preserved. And then this large charcoal beam, right next to it. So we got down about the 3 meter mark. All of a sudden, we start finding wood everywhere, right? Which is really, really cool and kind of gives us a different, opens up our ability to interpret what's going on in the past, right? And this isn't unique to us, right? Previous excavations at the site will also find wood, right? So when Hegedus was digging it in the 70s, there she is, looking super fly. They used to dress a lot better during excavations than we do. She found multiple burials, Neolithic burials with coffins that we actually had a student looking at this year, kind of understanding that like about half the Neolithic burials were in coffins, right? And this is a drawing of it, so you can see where it's designated, right? So the coffin, some red ochre here decorating the thing, the legs, large beams that were also found, right? Which is really important because as prehistoric archaeologists, we're really good at finding pottery and stone tools and things that preserve well, and we focus on those. But these societies used a lot of wood, and we don't usually get to see that part of the story, right? Only under very specific conditions, right? So this is actually a reconstruction of what one of these Neolithic houses would have looked like. This is at the National Museum in Budapest. But these societies, would have canoes, bowls, houses, so much things would have been out of wood that are not available for us to understand, right? And so Magor actually kind of provides us a fuller story into the past that we just don't get. So that's one of the cool things that Magor is, and we're trying to deal with how to understand that. Because as someone who doesn't work on pelts, I don't even have a spot on my forms where to say how much wood you found. And this year we found a whole bunch, right? The other really cool thing about a tell site is, there we go, right? Looking at the change through time. So one of the goals that we've been trying to accomplish is dating this site really well, right? So it was dug in the 70s very impressively, but it didn't have too much radiocarbon dating. So we've done a series of radiocarbon dates to get very accurate times when this tell was inhabited and when it was abandoned, because both of those are very important parts of the story. So what we can see is that it was inhabited in 3 major phases, during the Neolithic, the Copper Age, and then later in the Bronze Age. And this is what this is demonstrating here. And I could take you through each period and talk about all the important things, but I think I'm going to show you instead, right? So feel free, as this is going on, to give me some oohs and ahs, your favorite parts, right? So here we have the trench, right? And I'll show you where these periods are represented. Here, I made a little diagram. This is what the tell looked like before it was inhabited, right? It was just a little ridge, right, on the side of a meander. And then during the Middle Neolithic, people saw a small village there, right? It wouldn't have been too much different than any of the other Middle Neolithic villages. But for some reason, this one continued to be inhabited into the late Neolithic, right? And this is when it really built up. So this whole area here, all the late Neolithic layers, right? So all that, yeah, thank you, Dan. Right? And it was inhabited for till about 4,800. And then for some reason, it was abandoned, right? And we actually see that abandonment in the tell as well, right? Oh.
So do you mean that they actually raised soil to make it taller?
Yes and no. Some of the raising up is just from natural destruction of houses and then just debris building up over time. But sometimes they would say, oh, we need to build this up. They built platforms. They made the tell a little bit larger, right? In the late Neolithic, we see that, both of those things occurring, right? And then after that, it's abandoned for nearly 500 years. right? There's still people living in the region. This is actually the period, one of the periods I studied, but they're not living at Mágor. And then they decide, let's give Mágor another try, right? They're in the early Copper Age, right? And it's a relatively short period of time that they inhabit it. And that's what we're right here, including our burial friend right here, right? Tisopolgar burial, right? And the tell gets a little bit taller, right? So now this is a modern landscape. So in the early Copper Age, they were re-inhabiting this place, and it is a known entity, right? It is a visible, important place at that point. It's no longer just another run-of-the-mill settlement, right? But it was pretty short-lived, right? And for a very long time, it lay abandoned. Now, this one is only represented in the very back of the trench. So direct your attention there, and you can see that we actually see that abandoned phase right there. So no one's living there for a very, very long time. And then, again, in the Middle Bronze Age, it gets re-inhabited, right? So this is what we see here, and this is more or less where the tell stands now. This is the extent of the tell, right? The kind of 8 meters over the landscape that it is in the Middle Bronze Age. And that is right in the back there, right, where we found that woven mat. And then, what the heck? Get out of there. Thanks. All right. We have for the tell. That's kind of the story. That's what we're dealing with, trying to preserve, and then also to display, right? Because I can walk you through that, but I'm not going to always be there. Attila's not going to always be there. Danny's not going to always be there. The goal is to make that story visible to the public. Oh, last thing is, I forgot about this. And to get more higher resolution understanding of the chronology, we can take even more specialized samples called micromorph samples, right? Where you get little chunks out and understand the microstratigraphy. What that looks like is this. This is Danny taking that sample, and yes, for those who want to know, she is always like that, and it doesn't get tiring at all. All right.
It's hard to work with these people. I don't have a quippy intro like Billy did, so let's just get down talking about the preservation aspect, because we've heard a lot about the science behind it. We've heard the background, but how are we actually going about carrying? Oh, I'm sorry. Doop, 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 doop.
No, you.
Okay. How can we go about carrying out this work in an ethical way, in a way that's going to last? That's the most important thing for us, is to make something that lasts. We don't want the city of Mágor to be saddled with something that is going to crumble in 2 years' time, right? So there's a lot of different approaches that we have to keep in mind with that preservation strategy. If you guys were here last time, then you heard a little bit of this already, but now we're going to be able to see some more of these techniques being enacted. So you can see up on this display that we have a lot of different components to take into consideration. Yes, we're relying on traditional techniques, using renewable conservation resources. That's where our bricks come in. We'll talk about bricks a lot. We're also taking into consideration how we can use the archaeological data as well as the community science aspect in order to create an immersive experience for the people that are coming here. Keep in mind that the city of Vésztő is about 6,000 people. On average, in a year, it draws in, this park draws in about 12,000 people. That's significant for this small agricultural city. It's a city, just to let you know, not a village. It is a city in southeastern Hungary. So we really are trying to maintain this economic value as well as this historic value through our work at the site. So community engagement, we're doing this with the people, for the people, but that with aspect is really crucial. Not only working with the park leadership, we're also working with the city leadership. We're also working with the people that are coming to the site and hearing what they need to make it a better experience. Doing this earlier, the park just in 2024 did a complete remodel of the exhibition part of the museum. And they really did take into consideration the feedback that they had received from park visitors in the past, taking into consideration that they wanted more interactive components. So they put in these video displays in which they had different artifacts that they can now manipulate in 3D world and be able to see in new ways. So these are things that we're taking into consideration as we're progressing. And then, of course, scientific aspects that we are always keeping in mind as we're making progress on our research. Billy hit the nail on the head by talking about a lot of different aspects. But something else that we have to consider from a conservation perspective involves all of these different environmental monitoring procedures. And that comes into play for a lot of reasons. Because we're dealing with this lovely commie structure, great job, great job. There are some issues like, I don't know, birds nesting in the vents and pooping into the tell. Amazing, amazing what birds can do. We have water leakage because cement apparently over time well. And we have ventilation problems just in general. It turns out that the higher you are, like right up here, closer to those lights that help to, I don't know, allow you to see things inside the tell, the hotter it is. So we have microclimates inside the tell that we have to contend with, and we have to learn how to monitor, deal with, and mitigate in order to make this project a success. So path to preservation requires us to do a lot of different things, including systematic documentation of all the work. We're doing really innovative work, taking the spoils of the excavations, sifting it, which is everybody's dream job. Sorry, Aubrey, you didn't get that experience, but some people out here have. And getting rid of all those inclusions, then reusing the soil from inside the tell and making those bricks. We're trying to fix areas that are too fragile, but then also figure out those areas that we don't have to brick up, because nobody wants to walk in and see a completely remodeled thing. They want to see some of the original stuff too. So that's really important for us. And then the key spaces for exhibition development, we're still working on this. This is such a big process for us because once you make an exhibit, it's got to last for a while, right? You don't want to spend a lot of time doing that. So one of the things we're talking about in the works, we want to go and visit some other sites that have some good exhibits on how they're displaying materials. And so we can learn from other museums. So it's in the talks. We'll see how this works. Overall, of course, all this work is to bolster the interest of the site. Oh, how could I have forgotten this? All the hard work that Billy and Ruby did. The whole aspect of reusing this foils from inside the trench and making these bricks and then bricking things back up, it's not to cover the past. It really isn't. It's only to create a solid future for the site. And it's not going to be like you walk in and it looks like bricks. Don't worry. We are not just bricking it up. We are making it so it's going to be an interpretation of those very complex stratigraphic sequences. The process in making these bricks is, well, it's a learning process. We've mechanized it over time in order to increase the amount. Cliff and I were just talking tonight about making bricks and how you got to get it done and you got to get it done fast. And summer months are great times to make bricks, right? You said that they were making millions of bricks in the Southwest in one season. We have not taught that. We will not be making millions, hopefully, but we are good at getting over 1,000 bricks. I think that our top number, if I remember correctly, was 1,400. I was going to say it's less than 2,000, but more than one. So 1,400 bricks, pretty darn good for a 4-week season. Our pile has significantly grown over time. Oops. But there you go. We also like to make brick furniture as we go. When we take those bricks, bring them back into the tell, we're, after shaving down and excavating the different profiles, we are adding these bricks with the mortar that's also made out of the same dirt. And we're providing stable walls, but we also call them sacrificial walls. And we call them that because the only thing that's going to erode in the future is not the actual profile that has all of those intact stratigraphic sequences. The only thing that's going to erode in the future are going to be those bricks that we put in, right? So they're saving what's behind there. That's important. And should somebody come in and have a really good research question, they're like, what I need is right behind this brick wall, we'll say, hey, you can have at it. The nice thing about this, you can destroy these, you can put them back into a mixer, remix them, and you can remake bricks again and put them back in. it is, in all essence, a sustainable process. So you can see here, this is what it originally looked like with those issues. We have a lot of like failing renders occurring over here. And then afterwards, you get all those lovely brick smooth walls, but that's not the end of the process because that would be ugly to look at. In 2025, so this past season, one of our big goals, besides progressing and doing additional work on what we call this peninsula right here, we also wanted to, for the first time, attempt to paint the stratigraphic sequences back on the walls. And that's really what you're here for today, I know. We had a wonderful crew this year. We worked so amazingly, and they knocked it out of the park doing all of this conservation work. We even got henna tattoos to memorialize our hashtag #SaveMagor project. Here we have what it looked like at the beginning of the season. You can see all of these breaking walls and failing profiles over here. You can see our bricks that need to be smeared and dealt with. You can also see a dramatic difference between what we had to start with and what we ended with. You see how much we cleaned that up and displayed the objects a little bit better. We made the shelves look like they're actually doing something, being next to a fireplace or a hearth right here. And then also added some it's a resin in order to bring out the color differentiation. Because what you have here is actually a house. And so it's important to be able to note the different construction materials. And here it just all looks like a brown blob, right? So we really were trying to end with a better product, though we still have some work to do on it. The biggest thing that you might note too, beyond this, is that right back there. Ooh, is that a painting, you ask? Yes, it is. Painting the stratigraphic sequences is it's very subjective. And it's what you want is to be able to have somebody who's on this platform, the viewing platform, which is right over here, be able to look over and be like, aha, I see there are differences. Like the differences Billy pointed out with those chronological changes, right? Where you're like, well, something happened over here. That's very different from this time period here. That's whiter, right? We got dark brown, a lighter brown, and then a super white layer. Here's another period. This is the hiatus. And I think that it's pretty clear that it's different from the other things around it. So if we had an interpretive sign that goes along with it, you'd be able to see that more clearly. But at the very least, with the painting done, you're able to note the changes or differences of, in that area. What was required of us when carrying out this conservation work in this season involved a lot of trial and error, as it does most seasons, as it does on a lot of projects. But here we had Ashley, who's the lead conservator, and myself. A lot of times we'd be like painting, and then you'd have to like go all the way back up and just step back and look at it and think, is this right? Is this not right? And then you'd bring in other people and you'd say, Attila, do you think it looks good? Billy, do you think it looks good? Ask 4 archaeologists what they think. Get 4 different answers a lot of times, and that's okay. I think the end product speaks for itself. So we put together a quick little video to show you kind of like in high speed what this process looks like. We had a projector that was set up behind us that projected a picture of all the different stratigraphic sequences. And then Ashley and I took an interpretive approach with how to do this. And go team. That's it for me.
All right. So that's where the project stays right now, right? A little bit of archaeology, a little bit of conservation. But another part of it, as both Danny and Attila alluded to, is kind of the outreach and training, right? We have a bunch of students coming through, and we're wanting to train them in the archaeology, in the conservation, and also in the community, like the goal of the project, right? Because the end goal is not for us to sit here in Georgia and be like, hey, we have this really fun thing over in Hungary, right? It's for the people of Vésztő and the county of Békés to be able to benefit from this. So we've been training the next generation of archaeologists and conservationists in the landscape, the techniques. This is a reconstructed Neolithic house that's actually at the park, kind of showing what these things would have looked like before they dilapidated and turned into a towel. And also, another thing. I'm sure there's another thing. Did you turn it off? Yeah, just do it. Also, continual outreach in the into the community, right? So this year, the students were like super fantastic, real self-starters. They're going like, oh, we'll be the face of the project. Going out, going to festivals. This is them learning how to make bracelets, a nice lunch at the park. It's a really important part of the project to make this kind of sustainable, not just in the material, in the park itself, but in the people, right? Because at some point, we're going to be done, right? And someone, this thing is going to have to continuously be upkept and cared about. And then hopefully that these techniques and these approaches and what works and what doesn't work will be able to be taken to other archaeological projects, right? So hopefully Vésztő-Mágor is the first among many amazing archaeological sites that are able to be conserved and shared with the public, especially a non-expert public, right?
This is the last part. So basically what the future work is. As I mentioned, we're going to have a couple more years to do the excavation, cutting back profiles, stabilizing those profiles throughout the trench. But in the meantime, as I mentioned, we have this engineering company, local company. We also pay attention to that, where we actually work with local companies when possible. So they already came up with a blueprint for reconstructing the shelter. I'm not going to get into detail. Basically, the biggest challenge is to make sure that we can create a stable environment in the trench in terms of temperature and moisture, right? Because that would prevent further deterioration occurring, or at least would slow down. So that was like a big, huge engineering challenge. So the shelter will be reconstructed and customized, very customized HVAC system will be put in. And also, as you can see, the entrance will be renewed. We are going to have double door, in order to take, keep the temperature and moisture stable. We need that. And also we'll get rid of, unfortunately, that beautiful common facade. We're going to have actually a really good one, right? A really nice one. So this is how it's going to look. We are in the process of securing funding for that. And as I mentioned before, it's not just the shelter itself, but also the exhibition will be renewed. And this is kind of like it's not really well visible, but the point is here, we are working with another Hungarian company, an exhibition company, who already designs how we should rejuvenate the exhibition. Of course, we're working closely together with the park, because eventually the park is going to maintain the exhibition. And the exhibition company came up with some really good ideas, interactive, all this immersive experience for visitors. It looks really good. We're very costly, but we're in the conversation about that. So yeah, so things are nicely coming together. But again, we have very different sites that we take care of.
All right. And I'm very happy because tonight we have several of our previous participants in Hungary, not necessarily the Vésztő-Mágor, but they've been to Hungary for a variety of different projects that we've been able to have in the past. So whether they were on a Vésztő-Mágor project or a big Bardome project, we're very happy to see you guys tonight. So thanks for coming out. We will be taking students to Hungary this summer as well, but just for one season. We're going to have what we're calling the Kurdish Consortium project, where we're going to be working at this late Neolithic site called Szekelőm Kovácsolom. For this project, we'll take at least 4 students, but 4 to 6 students. We'll pay for their airfare, their room board, and like internal travel costs, generally speaking. The season will be from June 1st to the 29th. So the call for applications is going out. It's a slow process. We have our first meeting on Monday, so it's not live yet. I already made a poster, but until we finalize everything with all of our collaborators, I don't want to get it out there, but take a picture and the QR code will be active soon to take you to the application. We'll be having those applications due in December. But very happy to continue doing this work. Very happy to continue to share with you guys everything that we're doing in the summer. And yeah, let's take some questions if you got them. Oh, and hashtag Save Mágor.
My first question is going to be,
I'm sorry, and I'm so sorry.
oh, I'm sorry.
And thank you to everyone who's paid. Thank you to all of our sponsors. I did forget the last slide. We've had a lot of support for doing these projects in Hungary, so shout out to everyone. But now it's your turn, Tony. Yeah.
Oh, thank you, ma'am. Like a tail in Turkey, Göbekli Tepe was ritually covered up. Is there any evidence of that? That's my first question of tails in this area. And the second question is, you said it was abandoned for 2,000 years. Was that because of war, resource depletion, drought? Do you have an idea of what actually caused that, please?
Yeah, I'll take the second question first, because that actually is directly. So when it was abandoned in the Copper Age, that actually is the focus of my research, is that later part of the early Copper Age and the Copper Age in general, something I'm calling Copper Age collapse, because we actually see similar abandonments across the region, across Southeastern Europe. We're seeing demographic collapse, we're seeing important sites abandoned. So it was abandoned in the Neolithic and then rehabited in the Copper Age. Sites get abandoned and rehabited all the time. But that long abandonment, yeah, something is changing. Climatic, right? There's some sort of demographic collapse. There could be disease. There's no real strong evidence for like warfare, right? We're talking about small tribal societies. But for a long part, that region was very sparsely populated, right? And the interesting thing is, it was not completely abandoned in most periods, but they were avoiding Mágor, right? I mean, they were obviously Mágor, they could see it on the landscape. You walk around Hungary, and they were not living there. So they weren't just not living there, they were avoiding it, right? So what I think is really interesting, right? And there could be reasons, some places, maybe in that bend of the meanders, it's no longer too many mosquitoes, too many this, that, or the other thing, right? Their economy didn't work for there. I personally think one of the reasons is it was a place that was used for repetitive habitation over and over again, including a lot of burials, right? So one of the reasons when people go, why was it abandoned in the Copper Age? It's full of ghosts, right? How do we prove that? I don't know. Maybe some Ghostbusters. But yeah, so it was abandoned, then it was re-inhabited in the Bronze Age, which is a very similar period to the Neolithic, where people were coming together, living in large aggregated settlements. So they probably came in and this is exactly where we want to live, right? Build a ditch around it. This will be an important center, regional center. But in the Copper Age, that long period, that just wasn't happening. You didn't get those big regional centers anymore. Yeah.
Did have a first question.
Oh, yeah. So basically, throughout prehistory, especially when we talk about the Neolithic, in different parts of Eurasia, you will see sites with closing episodes when they intentionally closed up a site, like Göbekli Tepe, one of those sites when they had all these beautiful temples and the sanctuaries, and they intentionally buried them. So it happens, but in this particular case, at Mágor, we couldn't see that. Well, we can see on top of the tell, on top of the last layers of the Bronze Age, which is like the topmost layer, there was like a burning episode that may have been associated with probably an attack, but definitely not something ritual that may have, closed. When it comes to Billy, what we would see in the region, many times we have like these mounds, right? They are monumental in the landscape. These tell sites, it's not the only tell site in the region. There are other tell sites too. And you would see that, they were not preoccupied for thousands of years either. So very likely there was kind of like a taboo or, something people would not, occupy that most obvious, highest part of the landscape. It's landscape with a lot of inundation. It's like, it's marshy, it's a lot of rivers, flood would occur twice a year. Still, they are the safest places, but for some reason they were not. So that's interesting.
So answer to your first question is no.
Hold on. I'll get to the online questions in the seconds, but if you have them, please write them in the chat.
Hi, one of your first slides, you showed this thing starting 10,000 BC and moving up and moving up. And I saw by the time you got to France, it was 5,000 years BC. Are you saying that those areas were uninhabited before 5,000 BC in France? I mean, was that the movement of culture, civilization, or who was there before that?
Well, we'll never get back there. Sorry. No, that's a great question. Ooh, too far.
Yeah.
All right. So this is the Neolithization spread, the spread of the Neolithic package with houses, with domesticated animals and domesticated crops, right? Before that, you do have Mesolithic peoples out there, hunter-gatherer societies and groups. And when the Neolithic peoples came in contact with them, you do blending oftentimes, and then slowly over time, it is a process, mind you, people tend to give way to the Neolithic process, the Neolithization process.
So let me take a question from online. Sophie Wilson asks, what year students do you usually expect for the summer program? What year students? What senior? Whatever.
Okay, so because this is an NSF funded project, the students have to be freshman, sophomore, junior, seniors. Like if you are graduating this year, unfortunately, you have to be a student in order for us to cover your costs to go on the project. So you have to be an enrolled student. You know, you might not be in summer classes, mind you, but yeah.
Do you take volunteer outside student situation?
Yeah, volunteers are definitely welcome. You still have to submit an application, but tell us that you're not going to be a student and that you'll pay for your flight over, and then we'll be happy to consider it. Yeah, definitely. We'll still cover your room and board probably.
I just want to say I was fascinated that you found wood at all.
All right.
But I also was just curious, what was the date of the coffin that you found? The wood that you
Oh,
found?
he's on to us, you guys.
Was that copper? Hey,
So all of the coffin associated with this bears are all Neolithic, dating to around 4,800 BC. Based on context, we haven't dated the wood itself, but the burial that's associated with. We have dated some of the burials that Hegedus dug in the 70s that were in coffins, and they all date to that Neolithic. That's the finds that are with them. So it's all that kind of.
it's very unusual. I mean, it's very unusual that you can find wood.
Oh, absolutely. The
I mean,
preservation.
yes, but-
Yeah, so there's some sort of combination of how fast it was buried, the conditions of the clay. So it's a very clay matrix that's in. Everything else above is a little more powdery. Then you get to this clay, and it locks in the moisture. There's not a lot of movement of oxygen. There's not a lot of bacterial or mechanical deposition. And so wood and other things just preserve a little better. So we're missing a lot of the wood that would have been in the other periods is gone, right? It deteriorated. But some of it, for some reason, especially things that were purposely deposited, like burials, yeah, they're preserving pretty well. Like some of it's obviously not the full coffin, but like it's a lot more than we would ever expect.
Well, how unusual even to find, I mean, that they were buried in a coffin. It seems unusual, but I mean, I don't know.
It is, so, you know, it's probably because of preservation issues. It's actually exceptional. So there is no any other contemporary site with coffins. So this is absolutely exceptional.
I thought it was great.
Yeah.
Just to find that.
And actually, we have Terry here was there when we were finding it, and the buzz, we're just going, he'll get a box or something. We have wood.
We don't know what to do now.
Given the rumors about significant decreases in federal funding for science-related things, do you see any threats to the funding, especially from the National Science Foundation
Yes.
to archaeology in Europe?
Yes. Yes. The cut to funding is huge, and it's hugely detrimental to the science that we're carrying out and the work that we're doing, broadly speaking. So it's yeah, you can say more if you'd like.
Well, so one of the things I was applying to was shut down in the National Science Foundation because of just the climate, and then the government shut down. So like something I was putting together, going to submit, no more No more funds. The coffers are dry. Right? So yeah, it's affecting science.
So it is having a significant effect.
Oh,
And it's not just for researchers to post PhD. This is impacting students. It's impacting newly minted PhDs. It's impacting people trying to get MAs and PhDs. It's impacting everybody. And it's just going to get worse until they make it better. Like these cuts are just, they're gut wrenching. Any other questions? The online room?
No.
All right.
we're done. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much.